Welcome back to fundamental number 5. And fundamental number 5 is
range.
range.
And this is huge because this is one that everybody always wants to work on, right? When people come in for singing lessons, when they want to take singing lessons and want to improve their voice, one of the main things that they tend to think about is range.
Yeah, so what is range? Let's talk about what that even is. So range is the notes that you sing, so from low to high. And if you are someone who is really bare bones starting out and you don't even understand what I mean from low to high, lower pitch to higher pitch. So that's what we're talking about, is what is your range of notes that you sing, and do you want to increase that range of notes? Do you want to be able to sing lower and higher and grow that range? Most of the time when I have pretty much, like, I would say like 90% of the people that come into the studio who are taking lessons, one of the things that they always say they want is to be able to sing more high notes.
Right.
And we hear that all the time because most people, they're okay with like the lower to mid range stuff. And there's a reason for that. And we're going to get into that. Some people though do want to increase their lower range. And those are usually the people who sing higher naturally. And so there's always this idea of, I want to increase my range. I want to be able to sing more notes. So that's what our range is the amount of notes, the range of notes that we can sing.
Sweet.
Cool.
All right. So when you're talking about low and high, there's this concept or common terminology that's used
in the singing world.
In the singing world, which is chest voice and head voice.
Yeah, so let's define that for a second.
Okay.
So, and it's funny because in a lot of singing circles now, especially the scientific circles, they don't even like the terminology of chest voice and head voice. And there's, it's because it actually doesn't really explain what's happening for real in the voice. But let's just talk about that because it is the common terminology for the two different vocal ranges that we have within our voice. And so our chest voice is your talking voice. They're literally one and the same thing. And what I mean by that, it's the range of notes you use for speech is your chest voice. And we remember in the beginning when we were talking about pitch, we were saying the normal range that you speak on is about a 5-note range. That's just if you're having a conversation. That's your chest voice because that's your talking voice. But what I also mean is we tend to use a bigger range of notes with our speech. If we're very sad or tired, we talk even lower. Right? That's my talking voice still. Mm-hmm. Or if we're really excited, we talk a little bit higher. And so that range of speech is your chest voice. Cool. Yeah. The reason why people have called it chest voice in the past and why it's still, it's still there is because if you put your hand on your chest when you're speaking, you can feel sympathetic vibrations in your chest.
Yeah.
So when I say sympathetic vibrations, that means your voice doesn't actually, the sound waves themselves that your vocal cords create don't actually resonate in your chest because vocal cords are right here, guys. The sound comes through and out your mouth. So there's not actually sound in your chest, but there's sympathetic vibrations of the sound. And we do feel them lower when we are using lower pitches. So that's where the term chest voice comes from.
And I think guys tend to feel it a lot more in their chest just because they have lower notes, right? So
I don't
even need to put my hand on there.
And you can feel it.
I can just feel it without it.
Yeah. So just keep that in mind, you guys. The sound isn't actually in your chest when we talk about chest voice. And that's a lot of the reason why some of the community, the vocal community doesn't really like the terminology of chest voice and head voice anymore because it's confusing and it's not really accurate. But if you're considering that it's just about sympathetic vibrations, that's our chest voice. So it's your talking voice, okay? The cool thing about that is that the coordination, because now we're going to talk about the way that your vocal cords actually function, the coordination of your vocal cords to speak is the same to sing the notes that you speak with. Pretty cool, right? And that's why most people can sing in that range, is because they use that same exact, the way the vocal cords work, the muscles, the ligaments, the tendons, like all of it, it all works the same, essentially, as when you're talking. So chest voice.
So what's head voice then?
Head voice is all the high notes. Da-da. Like if you're actually thinking of that, low is in your chest and high is in your head.
So what's another term for it? Is it just like low register or high register?
Some people will say that. And the reason why we call it head voice is as you sing higher and higher pitch, you tend to feel those sympathetic vibrations in your head instead of your chest voice. So you can kind of feel that shift in vibration. Again, the voice is not in your head. It does not physically live there. The sound waves don't travel to your head. They come out of your vocal cords and out your mouth, okay? They just stay in the vocal tract. They do not go into your actual head up here. But as you sing higher and higher, you're going to feel those sympathetic vibrations in your head.
Sweet.
And that's where the terminology comes from. And head voice is a different coordination. Okay, so it's different than your talking voice, your chest voice. And that's why sometimes if you're singing along, especially if you're singing really loud, and then you go for that high note, you either can't get to it at all, like it's just not there, or your voice completely flips and it changes into a completely different sound and goes like kind of breathy, or it just has a different sound. So what that means is if you're going for your high note and your voice just stops and it just can't get there, it's because you're staying in chest voice coordination and you can't get into the higher pitch. You're not switching coordination for the higher sounds, okay? Or you are getting into that higher coordination, but you're transitioning very clunky, and so you can actually hear the change into the head voice.
Yeah, I know one thing, or one kind of analogy I guess I've heard you use before. It's almost like shifting gears in a car.
Yeah, you can think of it that way. Or like if you're a basketball player, like think of all the different, like it's like, hey, go play a basketball game, right? Think of all the different coordination developments you have to consider to do that. Or even different swings for golfers, right? How many different types of swings do golfers use, right? They don't use the same swing for every single thing they're going to do on a golf range.
Right, like if you're trying to put backspin on it versus just,
yeah.
I don't know, I'm not much.
Or if you're going to drive the ball versus putt the ball.
Right.
Right? So it's not fair to say that you're going to use the same swing for every single maneuver you're going to do with the ball, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with your voice. If you're going to sing higher pitches or lower pitches, that coordination changes. And the thing that's kind of cool about that to understand that is as you train your voice, it's completely achievable. All you have to understand is you're now in coordination development, not I'm trying to create a sound. It's just how does this function and how do I get it to work?
So there's no real, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no specific note that is like, okay, here's my, from here up is my head voice, and from here down is my chest voice.
Oh,
right?
there absolutely is.
Okay.
Isn't that fun?
but didn't you say that you can use that chest voice coordination to go up into a note?
So that's actually, now we're going to start to kind of get into a topic that we're going to do in the next fundamental, but we'll introduce it here. And now we're talking about the transition between the two, and that's your mix.
Okay.
Okay. But we're not going to talk about mix yet, because and that's where we start to get the two to come together and transition in the middle, so that there's not a change between the two. We actually learn how to traverse and connect the two coordinations. So there's just this beautiful handoff instead of having like this hard change between the two.
So instead of there being like one note where it's like above this and below this, it's almost like a range, it sounds
mix is kind of the range between the two, yeah, but there is, and this has to do scientifically with the way the harmonics and the pitch and everything works in our voice, and everyone tends to have vocal breaks at around the same places all the way through the range.
What determines where that that mid-range note is? Like obviously for a male,
men versus women is different.
Different.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, so that little break in your voice happens in a different place if you're a man or a woman. And that honestly is more dependent on how big your vocal cords are and how low your range is to begin with than anything. But those little breaks happen along the way in the same places for pretty much everyone. So it just depends on how low or high you sing.
So that's why it's kind of important to know kind of where your natural range is, right? Like what
Absolutely.
is most comfortable with you.
Yeah, for sure. But it's interesting that like you even have to consider small children versus people who've gone through a voice change, right? Little kids, most of them actually don't really have breaks in their voices. They have kind of just one coordination that they're using unless they sing very, very high, which is interesting. And that's why boys, after their voice change has happened, can struggle so much, because girls go through a voice change too in adolescence, but ours isn't as extreme as most girls' voice changes are not as extreme as boys. We'll just say that.
Sure.
And so because our voices don't get as big and drop as low, right? And so there is definitely a huge change that happens. And that's when we usually come into our like chest and head voice coordinations, because our range is increased because our instrument is bigger. And just like the rest of our bodies, it grows, right? And so that's why that happens. So there's like the pre-voice change voice that kind of has just one range. And then you have your post-voice change voice that you have these two very specific coordinations that we're dealing with.
Right. And so if you're a man and you've gone, or like a even more of a teenage boy, and
Yeah.
you sang a lot as a kid and you loved how easy it was to sing high notes,
and you got all
then
the
you go through
solos and the choir and
that
everything.
range, which we've had.
We have a lot of boys who have been boy sopranos in very elite children's choirs. They go through their voice change, and then all of a sudden they've dropped their voice octaves of range. And we're going to talk about this in just a second, but they go from being a boy soprano to being a baritone or a bass. And it just destroys them because they can't sing those high notes anymore. And that's really, really difficult, because all of a sudden they're not the star of the choir anymore, and they're not getting the jobs and all this stuff. Well, let me tell you, it's totally achievable to gain back that range, but it is a journey, because you have to essentially relearn your coordination in your voice. It's a lot easier to do if you start voice lessons before the voice change.
But wouldn't you maybe not be able to gain the whole range, because now you've changed the entire vocal?
Oh, sure.
Not vocal cord structure, but
Well,
your vocal cords have changed tremendously.
They've
in that
grown.
period
They're
of time.
bigger. Yeah, I mean, you're not going to be singing probably, your high C boy soprano notes anymore, but you are going to still be able to get into that head voice range and sing, up there with Sam Smith and Bruno Mars and stuff like that.
Sure.
So moving on from that. So that actually takes us into like various ranges. We're kind of talking about ranges ambiguously, like the different terminology for your range. And so a lot of people ask the question of, what is my range? If we're talking about soprano, alto, tenor, baritone, bass, if you can kind of throw that out there. And if you haven't heard of those terms before, so soprano is a higher female voice. Mezzo-soprano is kind of a mid-range female voice. Alto is a low female. And then tenor, high male. Baritone, mid-range male. And then bass is a lower male voice. And I like to think about that when we're kind of ranging people out. It's not necessarily where you sing, it's where you speak. So if you're just paying attention to the tone and quality of people's voices when they're just in their speaking voice, I'm a mezzo-soprano. I'm not a super high talker, and I'm not a very low, deep, rich talker either. So like this would be more of an Adele, right? And this would be a Kristen Chenoweth. And then this is me, right? So I'm right in the middle. I'm a mezzo-soprano. You are a baritone.
Right in the middle. We're middle people.
You're in the middle. Well, there's a reason for that. And you can hear guys too. You can hear guys who talk higher and guys who talk lower. And they have this, the James Earl Jones. It's
Right.
the bass, right?
So I would assume that most people probably fall into that middle category, right?
They do. There's actually a bell curve for vocal ranges. And that, you guys, that being said, just because you are a baritone man, that does not mean that you can only sing baritone notes. You can learn to sing tenor notes. You're just going to have the higher notes. You're just going to have a different quality of sound than a guy who's a true high voice, right? Same thing with girls who are altos learning how to sing soprano songs. Like you can do that. You can extend your range. However, there is a bell curve for our natural timbre in our voice. And so if you don't know what a bell curve is, it's the thing that goes like this in math. So it starts here and it goes.
Oh, that's a really high bell curve.
And the outliers, the ones that aren't as popular, or you don't see as much of them, are on the sides. And then the people who fall in the middle there's more, right? There's most people. So most people fall in the mid-range. Most people are naturally more of that baritone, tenor sound, or mezzo-sopranos. That's just where the bell curve is. And then you have your true altos, true sopranos, true tenors, true basses. And so that's just kind of what it is. If you are a true soprano or a true bass, that's pretty cool for you. Way to go. Awesome. Things are going to feel a little different in your voice than for someone who's in that mid-range, but essentially all those breaks we were talking about before still line up, okay? So kind of knowing where you are in the bell curve and knowing what your timbre is and understanding kind of naturally where you talk is kind of a big deal. I think that's really cool to notice that. So just because you're a female who can sing low notes, that doesn't mean you're actually an alto unless the quality of your voice is very low as well when you're speaking. So just keep that in mind. I can sing very low notes.
Right.
I have a very low range when I sing, but I don't talk down there. That's not where I naturally speak. So that's something to take into consideration when you're kind of deciding what your vocal type is.
So most of the time people come in, they want to sing more high notes, but can you train your range to actually go down as well?
You can gain a little bit on the bottom for sure.
But not as much.
Not as much as getting high. No, I think you can definitely open up your high range way more than you can your low range. Because look, the baseline of your vocal of your pitch, like the lowest you can sing, is dependent on your talking voice. It's actually dependent on the structure of your vocal cords. Smaller vocal cords are higher talkers. I can make myself sound like this. Smaller vocal cords naturally sound like this. Lower vocal cords, bigger vocal cords. Lower sounds, bigger vocal cords.
Right.
Okay? So it's
and that's why
actually
dudes
the size.
with huge Adam's apples
Yeah,
have deep
the reason
voices,
why
right?
men have Adam's apples is because their vocal cords are longer than women's. And so guys who have naturally very low James Earl Jones like bass voices will have huge Adam's apples. They'll just be sticking out as far as their chin. I'm just kidding. No, but yeah, so you can learn to get a couple notes on the bottom of your range, but you can't. I will never be able to sing bass notes, true bass notes, because I just don't have the physicality to do that. However, you can gain octaves on the top, which is real cool because that's more of a coordination than actual physical
right, like that's like
structure.
Learning to pull the balloon tighter.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But,
essentially, yeah.
But you can't make it
Small.
like smaller and stay connected.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, that's kind of the opposite idea of what's actually happening in the vocal cords. But yes, exactly. You can't actually change the structure of what's actually there. You can just learn how to make it work for you, essentially. When you are in your talking voice in your lower register, you're using the full length and depth of your vocal cords. You can't make them any bigger than that.
Okay.
So that's why you can't necessarily gain a ton of notes on the bottom, but we can use coordination shifts to get higher notes on the top.
So is there anything else that you'd like to bring up related to this topic before we get into the exercises?
No, what we want to do now is just help you guys feel both of your voices. We're not trying to connect them yet. That's when we get to the mix. What we're trying to do is see if you can feel your chest voice and your head voice. Because if you're kind of stuck in one or the other, that's a problem. Before we can get you to feel like you have one voice consistently all the way through, we've got to feel both of those voices first, even if they're disconnected. So we're gonna dive into that in our tip and let you start to feel those two voices. All right, guys, let's see if we can open up your range. We want to see if we can get into chest voice and head voice. Now, remember, it's okay if they sound different at this point because really what we're trying to do is just see if we can open up your full range as much as possible. One of my favorite ways to fill chest voice and head voice is actually through primal sounds. So what is a primal sound? A primal sound is something that your body naturally does in response to an emotion. So you feel a certain way and then you make a certain sound. Those are primitive sounds, okay? There's two primal sounds that are my absolute favorites for finding chest and head voice, and they totally work for most people, okay? But remember, it's the emotion that gives you the affect of the sound. So we need to dial into specific ideas of emotion, and then you'll be able to feel it. Now remember, chest voice is just your talking voice. Literally the same coordination as you speak. Okay, so that's what we use for all those low, beautiful notes. A really great way to truly tap into your chest voice, because some people don't even fully talk in what they can completely use as chest voice, okay? My favorite primal sound for this is the hey timbre. It's really called that, hey timbre. So picture this. Picture that you are in a crowded lunchroom and your friend is standing across the room from you and you want to get their attention without turning everybody's heads. So we're not going to full on shout, but we are going to raise our voice just a little bit. Hey, 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 over here, right? It's not a shrill scream, because then everybody turns and looks, right? And it's not a hey, it's hey, hey, over here. So if you can imagine that, and then it shouldn't feel like there's a lot of tension. It should flow just right out of you. Really move the air like this. Okay. Hey. I like using my hand. I always use my hands, right? Let's try that. Hey. So that's our chest voice. That's our talking voice. Remember, it all comes from the emotion. So really picture yourself in that situation where you try to get their attention, but without getting everyone's attention, right? Do it one more time. Hey. All right, so that's your chest voice. Head voice, the primal sound for head voice is the whoop timbre. And this is my absolute favorite. I love this guy. So think about this. Think about something that really excites you to the point where you want to jump up and woo! That's the sound. And if you can get to that place, that will open up right into that head voice range. The way you whoop is exactly how we're going to sing those notes on the top. Crazy, right? Now, for some of you guys, it might sound a little different at first. If it kind of cracks, totally accept the crack. That's completely fine, because at least you're finding that upper range, right? Remember, it comes from excitement. It comes from joy. It's not just a woo, okay? If you do that, you're getting stuck in your chest voice coordination. Woo, woo. That's not it. It's that one of my favorite things to think of is when my little brother used to play basketball. He was great at 3-point shots. He was a point guard. And those games when they were neck and neck, and then he'd go to shoot the 3-pointer at the buzzer and win the game, right? Woo! It's that excited whoop feeling. So it doesn't have to be super, super loud, but it is just a natural whoop. So let's try that. Woo! Okay. So now what we're doing is we're feeling these two distinct things. We're feeling that talking voice, hey, and that whoop up on the top, woo! Okay? And the idea is that we just start to get that opened up. Now, if your whoop is a little bit breathy, that's okay too, because at least we're finding it. As long as it's not that woo, woo is what we're looking for, okay? So let's just start to mess around with those two sounds. Again, remember, we're not shouting. We're not pushing the voice over the top. There shouldn't be a whole lot of strain with this. If you're feeling strain when you're getting hey timbre and whoop timbre, leave a comment below and we will try to help you out a little bit further, okay? So this is just going to help you start to feel those two different ranges in your voice. And let's move on to the next one.
We hope you guys are enjoying the Fundamentals of Singing video series here on YouTube. If you guys want more free resources on how we help our artists here at InvictiVox, please check out the InvictiVox Radio podcast on YouTube or any major podcast platform.